Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. As the ancient Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. You can't help but admit the world's going through some pretty turbulent political issues at present. Israel had that incident where Hamas killed a whole lot of people in a sudden attack, and now Iran had an incident where ISIS killed a whole bunch of people in a sudden attack. Israel and Iran do not agree on a lot of things. But it's interesting that Iran would suddenly get the flag to come out and start suppressing themselves some terrorists, as I'm sure they're saying in whatever expressions that they've invented. And all this is happening at the same time the United States, France, and the United Kingdom are stationing warships in Yemen. That's on the Red Sea. Because Yemen has Houthi rebels who somehow got a hold of rockets that can hit Israel. So they're not just getting hit by Hamas, they're also getting hit by Yemen. Now, fortunately, let's just call them the NATO warships, are doing a pretty good job of intercepting them. Israel's own defenses are doing a pretty good job taking care of their citizens. And that's why you don't see the devastation caused except for the first day. It's not very photogenic. It doesn't make the reporters look good. So they concentrate on the Palestinians and try to sway everybody's perspectives that way. Well, Iran has been an enemy. I know it's Iran, but I just feel horrible copying their accent because a friend of mine is Iranian and I cannot do it, and I know it. So I'm going to say Iran. Iran, United States, NATO, etc. have been on bad footing since 1978, I believe, when they overthrew the Shah and installed the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah is a religious leader. And they haven't admitted this, but it's kind of like a few countries having nuclear weapons. We know they got them, they're just not admitting it. And that's not just Israel, South Africa had them too. South Africa voluntarily gave them up because the apartheid people, de Klerk and his crew were checking out, didn't trust the new black leadership with nuclear weapons. Yes, South Africa's greatest gesture was because of racism. Aren't we glad those people are out of power? Anyway, I do have a point with this. I'm just kind of circling around the globe and looking at trouble spots. The United States has fleets deployed to the Red Sea, they have fleets deployed to the Pacific, and they only have 11 nuclear aircraft carriers. And these things are escorted by just a simply astonishing amount of support ships, destroyers, cruisers, stuff like that, because they need it. They can defend themselves quite well with their aircraft, but once in a while you're going to get a boat running into them or a submarine launching a torpedo, so you need that screen. The other problem is you have China. Now, China every couple of years runs up its red flag, quite literally its red flag, and announces it wants to invade Taiwan. And you get the posturing. Taiwan is updating their fleet. And normally I don't take this personally, except North Korea is suddenly making threats towards South Korea. And the idea with this, in the Chinese theory, is if you get the United States fleets in the Middle East and protecting Korea, it'll take them a day or two to get anywhere close to Taiwan, which gives China the opportunity to invade. Now, while I mean no disrespect to the Chinese, I don't think sea invasion is realistically possible. From what we can see, the invasion boats they have, while they're modernized, are still based on this basic BMP style craft. And the greatest seaborne invasion was Normandy in World War II. And that took years to build up. And if you look on a map, the distance from England to Normandy, and just use a measuring stick if you have to, use a pencil lead, whatever you need. Taiwan is a lot further away from anywhere on China than Normandy was. Those soldiers at Normandy were seasick coming aboard. They were under intense enemy fire. And Taiwan, while not China's equal, has a similar defense setup, if not better, because, 80 years of advanced technology and studying the film available. Now, this chaos in the world leads to people being very panicky. On Sunday, my family lost power. It was out for like 30 minutes. Wasn't that bad. We have our cell phones charged and stuff like that. No one was going to get hurt. But the family starts looking to me. Should we panic? Nah, it's winter. Goodness knows where a tree branch fell on the line or where somebody tripped the fuse because they were trying to operate 3 heaters at once. We'll be okay. Then yesterday, one of my friends has a bit of a mini freak out because in his area the internet is out. And this gentleman is a little towards the paranoid side, but he was thinking maybe the attack had already begun. I've said this before, I've said this a million times. The United States, China, and Russia are pretty much safe from any sort of attack. China has that huge sea coast, and while they have had territorial disputes with Russia where, armies were there getting shot and killed, they've mostly maintained that uneasy alliance for a great number of years. China cannot attack North America in any meaningful way. Was it Red Dawn, where they dropped the paratroopers in? Yeah, that's fine, except we have so many people with guns, not just airport security, but just casual people. And this is for Canada too. Farmers and hunters are out there. And while I don't particularly like the idea of independent militias, they do have a part to play. The other problem is Russia could only get here by going through Alaska, one of the most heavily fortified areas on Earth, or by trekking over the North Pole. I have 2 weeks experience in training for winter warfare. They're the most miserable 2 weeks I can recall. And imagine doing that while you're trying to go over the we were at minus 40 plus wind chill. And the Arctic gets a hell of a lot colder. Your machinery, ask the Germans in World War II, your machinery is going to be useless. So it's basically an infantry slog, and there's all those satellites are going to catch that right away. A land invasion of the United States, don't make me laugh. Probably Portland would probably be about the best area to try it. And even though Seattle is not a red state, they have enough armed people that you'd be even some of the most elite formations in the world would not even be able to make landfall. So land invasions are out. That is why the nuclear option was developed. It's better to be able to fly over a land, drop your bombs, and run away. And sorry, that's what nuclear warfare is. It's more complicated. You got to strategize. You got to figure out where air defenses are weak. You got stealth technology. But basically, you're just trying to walk away and leave them with a big whacking hole in their defenses somewhere. I don't think any nation really wants to be the one that fires first. China doesn't have enough missiles. They could, one country they can do a number on. Absolutely. But don't forget, there's Britain, there's France, there's Germany, who has never publicly admitted to having warheads, but they've been looped together with South Africa and Israel by combining their technology and using it to develop some warheads. We know South Africa had them. Israel is another nation that pretends not to have them. And Germany will not want to show Europe that they had nuclear warheads on standby because the Soviets would have been pretty annoyed with them and NATO would have been pretty annoyed with them, given, their history 80 years ago. The Germans today are a different people, but unfortunately that history still lingers. So Germany would probably be in that mix. You have Pakistan having nuclear weapons. You have India having nuclear weapons. India does not like China. China does not like India. So some of their missiles are going to have to go towards India. So to take out Russia, which is quite unlikely, they would have quite a job. And to take out the United States with theater high altitude air defense missiles would be a real job, even though the theater high altitude air defense missiles are not quite good enough to completely protect every place. Yes, you're going to save some cities and a lot of civilians will be happy you spent that money, but we're depending on a magic bullet when we don't even know 100% if it works. So what about Russia? Oh, does Russia have warheads? They have more warheads than anybody on the planet. They have more weapons to put them on. The problem is, as demonstrated in the Ukrainian war, Russian technology is not as advanced as we gave them credit for. That being said, I think they're probably similar to US warheads where it's going to hit about a mile around its top target. And generally they're in the 2 megaton range, which means if you miss by a mile, it doesn't matter if you missed. The United States is getting even more cutesy because they have better tracking and better computers than anybody else. So they claim that they can land it wherever they want, and they only have a 1.2 megaton yield warhead. Although its bombers have like dial a yield, which always I found comical. It means you can select a yield from like 500 kilotons to 1.2 megatons. Does it really matter when it hits the ground? Like it's not like we're Star Trek where we have shields or anything like that. We're a type zero point 0.8 civilization that can barely protect from a flamethrower, much less a nuclear blast. That being said, all these nations have a reason not to use nuclear weapons. And that's simply they don't want to be the ones left holding the bag. And nuclear warfare probably is going to wind up with some people surviving. It's not as bad as most people says it'll be. It's not good, but yeah, not all the missiles are going to get through. Some missiles we've never actually tried, like humanity has never tried flying an ICBM over the North Pole, where the magnetic fields are much more intense than they are anywhere else on the planet. But that's the path for them to come over, so that way they can hit us. So we might launch everything and nothing gets through. Not a big possibility, but the likelihood is greater than 0. So it's worth mentioning. As far as the survivalists go, well, let's call them the doomsday preppers, because the survivalists, I don't really have a problem with you stocking some water and food and everything for your family. That's completely understandable. But when you're planning against a nuclear war, unless you're one of these people that have 3 years of MREs in their basement and some way to distill water, I don't know how you're going to get fuel to do that over years. I have a small solar generator that has enough to run a cell phone. If you really wanted to, you could probably hook that into a couple wires and make a small water boiler and, hook up some beakers, and that way you get fresh, clean water out of the radioactive water that's coming down. But Most people are not going to have anything close to that, and nor should they. If you are rich and you have this idea that doomsday is coming, probably about 3 months of food is all you're going to need. Because governments, as shattered as they are either going to come through in 3 months, or after 3 months, the radiation is going to dip low enough that you're going to be able and get some sort of wild edibles. So, the people with the bunker in their basement and stuff like that, yeah, you're overdoing it. 3 months, either the government's going to be back up and running, or everything's going to be so pulverized that whatever you find is pretty much okay for you to eat. That's a very distant possibility. The scientists keep setting the clocks back closer and closer to midnight, but I don't actually see the political will to use nuclear weapons. In Korea, the United States stopped the war when it was finally sick of it by threatening to use nuclear weapons unless everybody came to the peace conference. China didn't have nuclear weapons back then, and they didn't really completely have the trust of the Soviets. The Soviets have an anti-first use policy. They won't use them first, but they will respond. They had a couple incidents in the 1960s and one in the 1970s where commanding officers were ready to commit nuclear torpedoes and nuclear weapons, and they were overruled by some people with a little bit of sanity left in their head. So they've just said, okay, we're never using it first. You can't use anything unless we specifically tell you. And China, like I said, if they fire on someone, they got to make sure it's going to hit. If they went after little Taiwan, they wouldn't use nuclear weapons. They want that island intact. They want its industry. They want its people. They just want them to fly a different flag. And the people of Taiwan object to that. So when you're hearing all these flashpoints, remember, it's in nobody's interest to fire and launch first. It's in nobody's interest to even invade anybody. What did we establish with the past 20 years of peacekeeping in Iraq and Afghanistan? We established that we left pretty much the same people in place that were there when we got there because unfortunately they actually remember how to do things the way that they used to be done. Russia, when it captures Ukraine, is just going to impose its own infrastructure and to heck with anybody else. Although I don't imagine they're going to get rid of too many of the people that are already in place. The United States just likes to show off its firepower, so that way, in case anybody thinks they're weak, they can rattle a couple machine guns off and take care of the problem. That's the United States way. So we wind up with, instead of all these flashpoint events and thinking the end of the world is nigh, we find that this is pretty much business as usual. Don't buy into the hype. Be prepared. Silverlight has always said be prepared. But don't be panicky. When you're panicking, you're not thinking. Humans are at their most dangerous when they're calm, when they're thinking things out, not when they're angry or the president did this, the president did that, whatever the case may be. No. When they're calm and they're thinking, I have you exactly where I want you, that's when you know to pay attention. So with that, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Don't forget to click the bell icon down below. That way you'll be notified every time there's a new episode of the Silverlight Show. And we hope you have a fantastic day.